But anyway, Dan and Benny in the Ring is a podcast that everybody ought to listen to. As a matter of fact, I'm going to have Hotchkiss Featherbottom put it on my playlist because I don't know how to work that shit. But guys, in all seriousness, keep doing what you're doing. Keep plugging away. You can do it.
Hello, friends, and welcome to another edition of Dan and Benny in the Ring. I'm Dan Spasciano, joined as always by the playa himself, Benny Scallop. Benny, how you doing, buddy?
Dan, it is episode number 197, and I have but one question for you, and that is, who's in first place in the NFC East?
So I'm wearing the shirt today.
They're looking good.
That's certainly the case. The fact that it said it was 2016, the last time they put up 40 points in a game. And also, as the season ended over the weekend, well, technically tonight, both the Yankees and the Orioles are in the playoffs, Benny. So it looks like we still got a few more weeks of trash talk between us.
Let's see what happens.
Let's go. Nothing.
Well, as you hear, we've got some support in the back there, Benny. We have two fine guests joining us this evening. Why don't you tell everybody who's on the line with us tonight?
Absolutely. So a rare dual intro. Our first guest was actually one of our very first guests, episode number 12, to be precise. And he told us that unbelievable story about how he broke the sugar hold of the great Bob Roop. And, of course, talking about Bill Harding. And our second guest wrestled for both WWF and WCW. He was also the Smoky Mountain heavyweight champion. And he is none other than the great Bobby Blaze. Gentlemen, welcome to Dan and Benny in the Ring.
Good to be back.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it, man. I've
Our
heard
pleasure.
great stuff. Thank you so much.
We appreciate having you. I know we're looking forward to some good stories tonight. And Bill, Benny mentioned you've been on before, so I'd like to start with you. It's been a while since you told the story. I'm going to set the table here if I can. This was 1981, Frankfort, Kentucky show. Angelo Paffo's Rogue, the ICW promotion. 19-year-old, 150-pound version of you steps in the ring against the Olympic wrestler Bob Roop, famous shooter, legendary Sugar Hold. Your mission was to break it, cash prize of $1,000. I know we never get tired of hearing the story. You told it 180 episodes ago. You kind of take it from there. You got to fill in anybody that may not have heard this story.
What a story.
Well, in May of 1981, I was watching ICW, as I usually do on Saturdays, and they offered this challenge called the Sugar Hold Challenge. Bob came out. He had this big bag with him, and they were promoting on him, and he spread these silver dollars all the way across the table and said, if anybody can break a sugar hold, amateurs, professionals alike, come on down. You can try it out. And they offered one at a couple of the events that they were having. And one of them was going to be in Frankfort, in my hometown, on June 3rd, 1981. So I thought I'd give it a try because I'd been in martial arts for 8 years at that point. There wasn't a lot of tournaments going on or anything. So that's my real reason for going down there. I mean, the money's good and all that, but you just got to focus on what you're doing first. And I trained for a couple of weeks with some friends of mine because I had been cross-training in karate and judo for some time. I've been in karate for 8 years and judo for 4 years. And went down there and trained at the YMCA with some friends of mine trying to get out of this thing. And it's a tough hold. Yeah. And I found what I thought was a solution to it by accident because I had drawn a sketch of it the day I saw the promo. And I just couldn't figure it out. And then I laid the sketch on the ottoman in front of me. I went to the kitchen. I came back. And I wasn't looking at the sketch the same way. I was looking at it from the side, and it looked like the people were standing up. And to me, it looked like just a standard judo hip toss. I'm talking day one thing that you learn in judo. And I've talked to some people about this, and they can see it now once I said that. So I thought, okay, I'll try that. So I went back down to the Y. I worked with some friends of mine. And I tried it, and I found that the only way that you can really do anything with it is once you're in the hold. For those people that never seen the hold, go look it up. It's pretty painful. Um, Once you're in the hold, you can execute a hip toss. You're the one executing the hip toss, and what it does is it'll put the person that has the hold on you, put their face right into the mat, hard. So if they've got your leg hooked, they're going to let go. Um, it doesn't matter. I've seen 3 variations of it. There's one of them that I haven't figured out yet, but that one I think I figured it out. So I went down there after promising my family that I wouldn't do it. They were they were totally against me doing it, especially my father. He told me absolutely not to get in the ring with that guy. So I went down there and I sat through the first several matches at the Frankfurt Convention Center. And every match that came up, I took my head and I'd do this little number and I'd put my head down and close my eyes. And I wouldn't watch the matches. All I was doing was thinking about what I had to do that night when they had this event come up. And it seemed like it took forever for it to come up. But they finally got to an intermission point, and that's when they announced it to come on down. So I go down there. There's like 3 other guys in front of me. There's this one big, tall guy that's wearing this black silk shirt and these black pants and cowboy boots. And he's got this Lyle Lovett looking hairdo. And he's the first one up. And he's just bragging how he's going to beat this thing and win all the money and everything. And he gets in there and he's done in like 3 seconds. I mean, Bob put the hold on him. Referee said go. He screamed.
Oh, jeez.
We're laughing. Everybody's laughing. It's like 1,000 people here. Everybody's laughing. And the second guy went in there and he lasted about 10 seconds. And I was kind of worried about the third guy because I was talking to him while I was going on, found out that he was in the Army. So I thought, well, he's got some combat training, so he's more than likely to put up a good stand. And he did. He stayed in it for about 20 seconds.
Wow.
Before he just tapped out. And when I had gone down there to the ring, I remember some lady looking at me as I went past her to the timekeeper's table. And she said, well, where's he going? Because here I'm like 150 pounds, soaking wet, and I'm just really small. But I'm also really agile because of the martial arts training and skateboarding, and my balance was great. I was in good shape. And I got in the ring, and I walked over to him, and I never said a word to either one of them. Never said a word to the ref or Bob Roop. I just laid down on the mat, stretched out on my right side, and Bob just went, okay, then. And he got down there, and he put the sugar hold on me. And I remember looking up at the referee and looking up at the lights in the ceiling of the auditorium. And I could see the dust floating, but it looked like it was dust was floating in slow motion. Everything is just slowed down. And the referee said, go. Now, my plan was to go between the G and the O. And that's what I did. So as soon as I heard him utter the words go like that, I twisted my body as hard as I could. And I put Bob face first into the mat. And he had to release my leg, and he put his hand on the mat. But at this point, since I had gone over, I went spread eagle on the mat. And I had my head against the mat so he couldn't put any pressure on it. So basically, I nullified the sugar hold at that point. And I also had him in what looked like an exaggerated arm bar. And because of that, I started pushing up with my right hand and leaning into it so he couldn't get up. But then I had to figure out how to get out from under him because he didn't go all the way over. Because the people I worked with, I managed to take them all the way over. And that's what I was trying to do with him. But he's a lot bigger than the people that I was working out with. And somehow I managed to do a push-up with him on my back, thinking I was just going to do a little unweighting movement and kick out from under him and then get on his back. And right at the very microsecond that I was going to pull this thing off, he grabs my right leg and flips me around all the way to the front where I land on my back. Now, he's still got my head cradled. But as soon as my feet hit the mat, I kicked up and I scissor locked his head. and I started choking him. But now neither one of us are in a comfortable position. I mean, my nose is like 8 inches away from my right knee, and I'm trying to push back against his arm, and I've got both of my hands back like this over my head, trying to pull his arm up over my head, and he's just not giving up. So it goes on for quite a bit of time, but like he said, 1 second seems like a minute. Um, I heard him say, "Damn, this boy's strong," and I felt that arm give a little bit. So I released the tension on my neck to lean forward. And as soon as that arm gave, I just pulled the arm up over top of my head and kept him in the scissor lock and rolled him to the side. And then I kicked away from him and jumped up. And I just stood there for a second looking at him. He was on the ground. Referee was still on the ground. And I look up at the crowd and I throw my arms up in the air like, and the crowd just jumped up. The crowd's going crazy. Because when I first got in there, they were laughing at me. Now they're going crazy. And when I turned back around, the ref looked at me and said, "No, no, no, you didn't beat the time limit." And this is where all hell breaks loose. um, Bob saying there was a time limit, and I never heard one announced. And we're arguing back and forth about this thing. And Bob says, "Hold on for a second, hold still." And he comes over and he grabs both sides of my head, and he's looking at me. And I'm like, "What's the deal?" He said, You've ruptured blood vessels in your eye." He said, "We're not doing it again." Because I told him right there, I said, "You don't think I did it? Get back down there." I said, "Get your ass back down there. We'll do it again." And they didn't want to do it. And something that I've always pointed out at this point, it could have gone 50 different ways at this point, but Bob did a good thing there. I mean, he's told me that he doesn't want to hurt anybody in the ring. I've heard other stories, but in my instance, that's exactly what happened. He said he really didn't want anything to do with it or do with that promotion they were running. And so they left the ring, and I'm standing in there all by myself. And I don't know what's happening here. I know that I'm not getting paid for nothing. So I walk over to the ring rope, and I'm leaning on the ring rope, looking back toward where they walked out. And there's a friend of mine named Steve that's sitting in the front row. And he said, "What happened?" I said, "Steve, I don't think they're going to pay me." And he looks back at me and he says, "Well, go grab the microphone." And I said,
Wow.
"That's a good idea." So I walked over to the table and I picked up the microphone. And I said, "I want my money." And I just kept saying that because I couldn't think of anything else to say. And the crowd started getting pretty rowdy. And maybe about 5 minutes later, Bob Orton Jr. comes walking toward the ring. And I'm thinking, yeah, that's going to be good. So he signaled me to put the microphone down and come over and talk to him for a second. So I walk over there and he said, "Bill," or no, he didn't say, "I'm sorry." He said, "Bob Roop's a good guy. And it would be in your best interest to just forget about all this and leave the ring. Otherwise, I'm going to put you in a hole that makes your tongue suck, you dick." And I'm like, yo, I don't know what to think about this. And my first instinct was he's this close, he's like 2 feet away from me. And my first instinct was just slap the crap out of him. But I didn't want to do it because he could annihilate me in a heartbeat. I mean, Bob is no small guy. Neither one of them are small.
Right.
Right.
And plus, when I thought about it later, I thought there's the hook to get them off the hook. Because if I hit him, then it's an assault. And so I just kind of walked away from it, and I didn't say anything. And he walked back towards the dressing room. He stood in that doorway taunting me. So I just went back over and picked up the microphone. I said, "You go back there and tell him I want my money." And that went on for about another 5 or so minutes. And then I guess they decided to just go on with the show. So out comes Rip Rogers carrying a pair of boxing gloves. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I remember what's going on now. you know,
Yeah.
because he gets in the ring. I walk over and shake his hand. I say, "Hi, how you doing, Bill Harding?" And then a minute later, Pez Watley was walking out with a pair of boxing gloves because they're going to have a 10-round boxing match. And I told that to Cornette, and he said, "Damn, how many gimmicks were they running that night?" And so while all this going on, I went over, shook Pez's hand, just not thinking, just not being in my right mind about this. And then here comes the arena manager and the police, 2 police officers. And they're, just a second, I forgot to tell you. Back about the time limit thing. I went to the timekeeper's table and I asked them who was keeping time, and they said they were. But there was no clock on the table. They didn't have a stopwatch. There's no clock in the building you could see. And when I confronted them on that, they both got up and just looked at me and they walked away. Didn't say a word. So getting back to the point where the police are coming, they come out there and the arena manager says, it's time for you to get out of the ring now. They need to go on with the event. And I said, I'm not leaving until I get paid. And a police officer came over and said, you don't get out of the ring now, we're going to arrest you. Okay. So I get out of the ring, and instead of letting me go back to my seat, they take me back and they lock me up in a storage room and just tell me to stay there. And I'm like, I don't know what's going on now. So I get on the phone, made a call I dreaded making, but I called my house and I got hold of my stepmom. I said, I need a lawyer down here now because this thing just went sideways. And I had to explain to her what was going on. And a couple of minutes into that call, a police officer walks in the room and says, put that phone down. And I told him, I said, I'm calling a lawyer. He said, I don't care. Put the phone down. So I said, I'll call you back later. And I put the phone down. And they said, the arena manager came back and he told me, he said, I've talked to him. They don't think he broke the hold. They're not going to pay you. But they said, if you want to stay and watch the rest of the event, you're more than welcome to. And I thought, well, cool. I did pay $5 to get in.
Yeah, how nice of them for
or $4. I paid $4. I didn't get the deluxe seats. Yeah, that's really nice of them.
William, you guys, Dan, Benny,
And he came
those
back.
shows, ICW used to run all these towns in Kentucky, and so I've heard William's story, firsthand. Of course, I heard it first on the 605 podcast, but
right, same here.
William and I have since become friends and hung out and this and that. But man, that if you just knew back in the day how ICW was, man, you hear the term outlaw promotions. They were,
right.
Back in the day, man. But the thing is, and I went on to the time I was young watching those shows. And William and I are pretty close in age, so we're getting a lot of the same shows from where he's at in one end of the state or middle, and I'm at the eastern part, and it's all over. I love that story and knowing that crew. But they had, like you mentioned, first of all, you got Bob Roop, but they had, we'll come to this later on, Professor Boris Malenko was there at one time.
Oh, yeah.
But, Pez Watley and Bob Wharton Jr., Pez told me, he said, man, if they'd go out wherever they was at the first 5 minutes of like a shoot, they just try to outshoot each other. And they legitimate, wrestlers and stuff. And they just had a crew. I don't all those Weingroff, I was going to say, but all those guys, there was actually guys that knew how to work and shoot and hook,
Right.
And having seen those crews. And also I've become good friends through the years with Rip Rogers. And man, he's told me so many stories backstage at things, that happened too back then. And again, it's just William, that's an amazing story.
Well, Bill, how did you, because at this point you think you're going to go to jail, right?
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to
verify cool. It's fine.
ICW stuff was
that's
outlawed.
Good insight there.
Like what Bobby was talking about, the roster was amazing. I mean,
yeah. Oh yeah,
Savage. You got Savage. You got Lanny.
I didn't go into all the Popos and Savage stuff. They had so much talent. I was talking about the hookers and shooters.
Yeah. Anyway, they had locked me back up in this
go ahead
room. They they let me go, telling me I could stay if I wanted to. So there was these posters laying there on the table, and I said, "Do you mind if I take a poster and a pencil?" And he said, "No, go ahead." So I went out there and I said, I'm just going to sue these guys, so I'm going to get witnesses. And I went to ask the first three guys that did it if they'd come down and be a witness. First guy didn't want to have anything to do with it. The Lyle Lovett guy, he didn't want to have anything to do with it. The second guy and the third guy, the second guy and the third guy signed up. And then next thing you know, a couple of people came up and they said, "What's going on?" And I told them what was going on, and they started signing the poster. And then next thing I know, there's like 30, 40, 50 people lining up here.
Right on.
They're all around me asking what's going on. And right about that time, I heard somebody call my name, and I turned around, and it was Sheriff Sam Harrod, who was a good friend of my father. And he said, "Are you Billy Harding's boy?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "What's going on?" And I told him what had happened up to that point. And he said, "Well, I'm here with my granddaughter, so there's not much I can do about it." And I said, "I know." And right about that time, those two police officers that had taken me to the back before came back because of all the people that were crowding around me now and said, "You're causing a disturbance. You're going to be arrested." They took me back to that same storage room and locked me up again. So I'm sitting in there for about 15 minutes, and Sam Harrod comes walking in, the guy I just talked to, the sheriff of Frankfort. And I told him what was going on. He said, "You sit right here. I'll be right back." And he leaves for a second, and maybe about 5-10 minutes later, he comes back with Angelo Poffo, wearing the miser mask, that red, white, and blue with the star eyes mask. And he said, "All right, how are we going to settle this thing?" And I said, "Well," I said, "you can just pay me." He said, "Would you take $250? He said, "That's pretty good. Would you take $250?" I said, I just shook my head no. And he said, "How about $500? That's great. Let's take $500. And I said, "After what you guys put me through tonight, I'm not leaving here with less than 1,000." And he looked at Sam Harrod, and he didn't look happy. And he walked out. Yeah. And he walked out, and Sam said, "I'll be right back." So I'm sitting there about another 5-10 minutes, and Sam comes back, and he gets me, and he said, "Come with me." And I walk out the door with Sam, and there's the two police officers, and the two police officers and Sam are escorting me back to the ring. Now, this part, I can't remember if they were in there first or whether I was the first one to get in the ring. But I think there was somebody in the ring when I got there, but that's neither here nor there. I was in the ring with the referee, Angelo Poffo, Bob Roop, and Sam Harrod. And Angelo starts explaining to the crowd how there was a miscommunication about the time limit, and in all fairness to me, that they were going to pay me the $1,000, and they gave me that check for $1,000 that I still have a copy of. Now, my first thought was to ask where that bag of silver dollars was.
Right.
But I figured at that point it'd be better just to take that check and get the heck out of there.
Yeah.
Which I did. And I got in the car and ran to the car. Went home, walked in the house, go in the kitchen, and I tell my stepmom, "Where's Dad?" He said, "Oh, he went down to the arena to get you." Oh, Lord. So I'm sitting there waiting for him to come back, and I could hear the keys in the door, and I'm sitting on we had a couch in the kitchen, and I'm sitting on the couch, and he walks in there, and he just reads a riot act to me for 2 minutes straight. And then he just stops, dead cold. And he looks at me, and he says, "Let me see the check." So I showed him the check, and a big smile come across his face. I think he just really didn't think I was going to be able to do it, but he was proud of me for being able to do it.
Right on, man.
I mean, but that's a story as far as it goes. I mean, to me, it's funny now. I didn't watch wrestling for probably 15 years after that because I was really angry at those guys. with one exception. And I told this to Bob when I did a panel with him, Bob Roop, that I watched him on Georgia Championship Wrestling when it was on. I would watch it up to his point in the show where he'd be on, and then I'd turn it off. And he asked me why. I said, because I want to see if you're going to do that challenge again. And I was going to come down to the Omni, and I was going to see you at the Omni. And he said, well, that's probably when my back problems would have flared up again. But yeah, I mean, that's the story. It's funny to me now, and he says it's funny to him. And I give him all the respect in the world for doing the right thing that night. I know it was a promo. I know they never expected anybody to be able to do it. And it was just a unique situation for me.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed it. I mean, I enjoy it now. I was pretty upset about it for a while, and the funny thing is, the first thing, and this leads to Bobby, first wrestling program I started watching again was WCW. About the time he was on it.
Well, you know, Bill, like Bobby, I heard it first on 605 Live, the podcast, and I mean, I was like, dumb, spellbound. I just couldn't stop listening to it, and the story I wrote about it, because after we had you on, I wrote a story and I submitted it to Pro Wrestling Stories, the website, and it's got over 77,000 views. It's still getting. I mean, it's been over 3 years, and people still read every day. I get hits on it, and so I guess my question is: did you have any idea that, like 40 years after this happened, you'd still be talking about it?
No, not at all. As a matter of fact, when it was brought up to me, it came about. The 605 thing came about because there was a gentleman by the name of Joshua Greenbaum who was part of the 605 group on Facebook. And I think somebody had mentioned it on there, or they were talking about it. So I said, oh, well, if you guys are talking about this, you might be interested in this. And I put that picture I have of the check and the original ticket from that night and the flyer on there. And that got a reaction. And Brian contacted me, asking me if I wanted to be on the show to talk about it. And I said, yeah, okay, sure. I didn't really know because I hadn't talked about it for 37 years. I mean, that was 2017 when I talked about it again. Had not talked about it for 37 years with anybody except maybe a message board once. I put a story up about it. And he contacted me, and I didn't know anything about the 605. I didn't know anything about Brian Last. And I started doing some research on it before I did it, and I thought, oh man, this is not a small show. This is a big show.
No, not at all.
And I got really nervous. We had a family tragedy about 2 weeks before that, and I don't think any of us were in good shape. We lost a family member about 2 weeks before that. And that kind of affected me when I was talking about it because they started talking about Elizabeth too. And even right now, that kind of gets to me. Sorry, guys. It's just, I never expected it to be as big as it was. And it's allowed me to meet a lot of great people, meet and work with a lot of great people. Bobby was the first one to introduce me to Rod Hicks, Jason Stevens, Al Snow, and Jim Cornette.
Of course.
I met him about a month later after the show.
Yep.
And it's been going pretty good ever since. And I love Jim Cornette. He's a great guy. So that's my story.
What a story.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, Benny, we've had people, and the funniest thing is, and as we like Cornette here on the show too, as you saw from our little intro. But it's funny, Benny says 197. We're almost to 200 episodes. We've had people on the show mention what you did, and just random conversations of wrestling, the territories would have these random things, and somebody would bring up the Sugar Hold and be like, unless you get some kid in the crowd that can beat you, and then it's you lose all that money. And it's one of those things that when people talk about the territories as an attraction, something that wrestling has long since been missing, your story always seems to come up. And it's I mean, 40 years later, and here we are talking about it, laughing about it, having a good time. It's great stuff.
I think one of the reasons, and I'm not bragging about this at all, but I think one of the reasons that a lot of people, and I get asked about it a lot, was just the inconceivable nature of all of it. That you got some 150-pound kid from nowhere against a former Olympian and pro wrestler. There's 100-pound difference between the two. You know, how's that even possible? Well, I've explained it as best I can and in as much technique as I can to try to show people what it was that I did that night, because I remember that night like it happened yesterday. And it's some people just won't. There's some people just won't believe it because they just don't think it's possible. It is possible. There's not a hold out there that can't be beaten. You know, there's tough holds, but it was just a unique set of circumstances for that night. And regardless of what happened, you know, win or lose, I wasn't going to give up. I told him, you know, when I talked about it in Tampa, that if I didn't win, they were going to carry me out on a stretcher because I was not going to give up no matter what. And that's the only way you can approach stuff. You just have to work really hard at it.
Yeah.
And go in there because we didn't have the internet to rely on. We couldn't learn this stuff from YouTube. I went to physical instructors and I trained every day. That's just what you got to do. So there you go.
Yeah.
Work hard, kids.
It's an amazing story.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a thing about those holds. You were saying there's a lot of tough holds, a lot of tough bastards in that business and in the business. And again, they had a lot of tough guys in that locker room, but you stayed there and you wasn't going to back down until you got that damn money, man.
And I didn't know this was like 6 or 8 months after the Plan B stuff went down. Or maybe a year after that. And that's when Bob and all those guys joined up with ICW. I didn't know about all the stuff that was going on back then. I was just some idiot kid that went down there, you know, was going to try.
Hey, we're wrestling fans, man.
Yeah,
just wrestling fans, you know.
Yeah.
Didn't know that stuff going on in the back, and
Right.
years later, you found out people. I guess several of them had invested 10%. When you said the miser, I popped because, man, they would come here, you know, where I'm at, in Eastern Kentucky, and you know, I just heard the stories and through the years, and it just when they was doing it in every town, an hour apart, or 2 hours apart, or 8 hours apart. It was just those shows.
And
went on.
he really was a miser too, right?
Oh yeah, that's the gimmick. And later on in my life, I was in Tampa training. We'll come back to that, but I got to meet Angelo and Judy Poffo in person, have dinner with them, etc. But when I brought up ICW, it's just like, that company about bankrupted us all, you know. It was one of those things. But he was a complete gentleman, just so you know. But that story, of course, was, I never knew this until many years later either. But I was just there as like, a guest, and I was like, I was marking out too, like, man, when y'all come to my town, you know, just putting over the shows and the talent on that talent on that roster rather. And but anyway, yeah, I can imagine. The only thing, William, that you mentioned that my biggest question would be, and I know you got the check, and we've talked and we've kidded about it, and again, thanks for having me on the podcast, guys. Where was those damn silver dollars, man? You think they actually carried them around in that trunk of that car and we're going to give them to someone? You're crazy. There's no way they were going to give up.
Yeah,
I'm trying to remember who told me this, but somebody with ICW said it's much harder to stop payment on a bag of silver dollars than it is on a check.
That's a safe thing.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I went to the bank the next morning. I was going to make sure that I checked my cash. Yeah, I went to the bank the next morning and I took the thing up to the in Lexington. I had to drive. And I took it up to the window and I said, I need to cash this. And they said, do you have an account here? And I said, no, I just want to take it back to Frankfurt, put it in my bank account.
Yeah.
They said, hold on. And I saw her take the check over to the manager. The manager went over and got on the phone. And I knew exactly who he was calling. And I heard him say, well, he's here now. What do you want us to do? And he said, okay. And he came back over and he said, how do you want it? I said, hundreds are fine.
Give me a second, Nichols.
Yeah. Quarters.
100 Toronto Road, Lexington, Kentucky, ICW. That was their address. Was like 101 or 100 or something right there. And
I think that's Randy and Rip's house.
Yeah, that's what it was. Maybe that's what I'm thinking. But
yeah, their building was down on the corner of Rose and Vine Street, I believe. The workout.
That's funny. You can't stop that payment on those silver dollars. They were not going to give anyone in Kentucky or wherever they ran those silver dollars.
Yeah.
No, and there was somebody that even asked Bob when we were in CWF. He said, what's harder, doing the sugar hold or getting $1,000 out of Angelo? Both of us like, Angelo.
You get $1 off that, man, you go spend all you'd be tired of spending at the end of the day. And that's what you were. You was tired at the end of the day, man.
That's what Jim Cornette found the funniest. And every time I see him, that man took $1,000 off Angelo Poffo.
That sounds Jim.
As a matter of fact, the thing in Columbus you were at, Bobby Fulton's.
Yeah.
And you left early that day. You should have been there.
And right here, I Trouble, remember?
Yeah, I was sitting there in the front row. I had a front row seat somehow. And Jim is in the ring with Bobby. They're doing this like live interview.
They did a live podcast, yes.
And the arena's full. I mean, it's full up to the ceiling. And
hanging from the rafters.
Yeah. And I'm sitting there ringside and I'm looking at him and I got my 605 shirt on and everything. And I see Jim look my way because the guy who with the microphone talking to the audience, taking questions from the audience, is standing almost behind me. And I see Jim look my way and he kind of squints and I wave at him. He said, William, that's William Harding. That's the guy that beat Bob Roop in the Sugar Hold. The next thing I know, like everybody's building's looking at me. And it was crazy. I saw him. I talked to him after that. That was a fun day because Bobby introduced me to Bobby Eaton. That's a good guy. That was a really good guy. I had a great talk with him that afternoon. And he asked about the story and he asked, and I got the question from him that I get from a lot of people. How'd you get out of it? So I had to show him how I did it. And, but I love talking to him and the other people that we talked to. Bill Dundee, talked to him a bit. And that was a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun times since 2017 that I never thought I'd be involved in, and still involved in till today. I mean,
definitely the ripple effect we were talking about. Bobby, I want to switch over to you for a moment.
Sure.
Excuse me. Benny directed me to a shoot interview appearance on the wrestling shoot interviews you did. You mentioned when as we talked in the intro, your time in WCW, you mentioned the kind of the chaos and disorganization you saw backstage during that time. We did an episode series kind of looking into the Who Killed WCW series, the television series that was done. And I was kind of wondering if somebody who was there, especially during some of the peak years of the insanity, if you could give us maybe your top couple reasons you thought WCW failed.
It's speculated, whatever. It's been, for years. I have to look back and realize I got on contract I could have got on sooner with WCW. I was busy with Smoky Mountain and staying busy with Independence. I was going to Japan. And when that opportunity came, and again, I didn't realize how big it was that we were right in the middle of the Monday Night Wars. And they would, it's back and forth. It's WCW, 83 weeks and all that. But so there was organization, but it was kind of, and I have my degree in communications. And to me, I guess the one theory that's out there is chaos theory. You throw something out there and it just goes everywhere like a damn, you're pulling a rubber the ball in the middle and you're pulling rubber bands everywhere. And it boom, and it all comes back to the center and it works out. So when I said that and I say it now, it's like you would get there sometimes. There's just a lot of chaos. You would have different road agents, and I was so thankful. Everyone was so good to me there. And I had a contract, and it all worked out really nice for me. But you'd go to the show, say you go to Nitro on a Monday, you have to be there, like say at 1:00. Well, first of all, say you went to the pay-per-view, and I got fortunate enough to be on a couple of those. So you start on Sunday, back when they did one a month per month. Then you go to Nitro next day. They'd have 60 to 100 people in the back, even though only 20 were probably going to be on the show, whether it be a pay-per-view, other than a 60-man battle royal, or the Nitro, you'd have 60, 75 people back there in catering, and they don't use maybe 20 people. And then you go to TV the next day to do on Tuesday after Nitro, and you would do the week 1 would come out on that Saturday, and then that was matches 1 through 12 would come out on one Saturday. Matches 13 through 24 would come out on the following Saturday. So you do 2 weeks of tapings. And you'd get there, and there'd be a whiteboard up there, your whiteboard, and it'd have so-and-so versus so-and-so, and you'd go to your road agent. All that was fine with me, but I would see people come in, some of the top guys come in, erase their name, said, I'm not working with this guy, and write their name with someone else, and they'd go over to the booking crew, and it'd be like, it was just crazy. I say, at that point, to me, what I saw the back was, too many Indians, not enough Chiefs. But I don't mean that, sorry if I offend anyone, that's not meant that way. It's just saying there's a lot of people that just would come in that would go over some of the, booking committee and this and that on the TVs. And then, when it came down, there was a lot of road agents. And again, most of them were very, very good. They kept changing, a couple of them changed. And that was like, okay, if, for example, like an Arn Anderson, who I have much respect for, Kevin Sullivan, Terry Taylor, some of these guys I'd speak to, they were pro Bobby Blaze. I knew I could work, and I could work with anyone, and I was very fortunate and blessed that way. So it put me in ideal matches. But then every once in a while, someone would come in, and I'd be up against that board, and someone would come in and say, "No, take Bobby out of that match. He has not have enough TV exposure on Nitro or Thunder or whatever it was at that point." So I was like, okay, I'm right here. So people were there getting paid, 60 and 70 people. So that's 40 to 60 people, maybe, depending on your numbers, were just there getting, okay, they're in the building if we need them, but you got your check every 2 weeks. So you didn't worry about that too much. It's like, because you had that clause, I had a contract and it's like 90 days to have to give you the heads up if something was going to cancel. But, it was just, I just felt like you could, at the end, you could kind of see the writing on the wall when my contract, I was there. And at one point they had approximately 150 people on contracts.
Oh, geez.
And yeah. So we go to Orlando every 3 months to shoot the worldwide. You would be in a big, huge studio. And the wrestling and ring and all that was in another studio. But you'd go in there and there'd be probably 200 people. You'd have the Mexican crew, the Japanese crew. You'd have the Florida boys. You'd have the Minnesota guys. Everyone kind of segregated themselves as to where you're dressed in this huge, huge studio, and of course, everyone, it was all good. It was all, when I say segregated themselves, it was just because that's who you hung out with, traveled with, etc. And then you would see the whiteboard. They have 5 boards up there because they'd run a show starting at approximately 10 o'clock in the morning, and you go 10 to 11. They'd take a half an hour break, 11:30 to 12. You'd have all these guys there. Of course, you're there, and you have your whiteboard, and you'd have who's going over or whatever on there. You just go out and work. But then you would have guys, and I think my deal was I'd go there to Universal. It went from Disney, MGM to Universal, and I think I was required on my contract to work at least 5 to 10 days while I was there 4 worldwide. And then, of course, while you're in Orlando taping, they might run Tampa, Jacksonville, Sarasota, whatever the Florida deal was, and Orlando, wherever. But so I would go to one of those shows too while I was in Florida, of course, which was an honor for me because I lived in Florida and been trained there when I moved to Florida to be trained. But yeah, I just think it was just a lot of stuff going on, man. And at the end, it just started becoming like, I think
Right.
one time Dean Malenko told me something, and I love Dean to death. I love his dad. You all had Jody on, and man, Joe Malenko, nothing but respect and love. And the same for Dean, his dad. But Dean said, Bobby, there's just a lot of guys here they're just hanging on to that last paycheck. So some of those guys, I think the higher up were just like, this thing could collapse or go haywire any minute. So they just kept showing up too, like, man, get me another paycheck, let me get by another 2 weeks or whatever. So they went from at 150 down to 75. I remember going from a town to do TV, and I was talking to one of Armstrong brothers, and we was like, wow, where's the rest of the crew at? Where's everyone at? And we had heard so-and-so got their pink slip and this and that. And it went from like 150 to 75 quick. Then 75 to 60 people that were on a guarantee. And I was like, I'm still here. And part of that was Jimmy Hart had come to me and spoke to me and said, man, you're still here. I'm just trying to save jobs, Bobby, And I was one of them guys, I guess, knowing my contract was going to expire, but also one of them things where I survived down to like the last 42 people. They let that 60 go to 50. And then there was like another 8. And I was in that group. And then the rest of them, when it got bought out, you can check all that. They went to either WWE or F at the time. And then Ford drew money until their contract expired. I was just like, man, how did I got lucky that way, but it was just, you could kind of see the writing on the wall that people that they weren't using regular, were getting their pink slips. And it was just one of those things that I lasted as long as I did, but that's because of talent, I think. And I'm not bragging because I have to realize that when people tell me, man, I saw you on TV, and I'm like, oh, okay. Sometimes I don't remember that stuff, but what I was getting at is talent, a little bit of luck, and also some of those road agents, man, would really like to have me on their crew, knowing, hey, Bobby, you go out there and do this, please. Not a problem. Not to babysit me. I'm going out there. I'll put whoever you want over,
Right.
and make you look good doing it. So, give me, pay me.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Bobby, going back for a quick, perfect segue into the Malenko. So we had Buck Bresner, he was on our show twice. He was trained by.
I'm sorry. Who did you say? I'm sorry.
Buck Bresner, the American Giant.
Okay.
He wrestled in '93 for WCW. We had Chris Whaley, who was the Masked Saint, and then of course, like you said, we had Jody. I've never heard a bad word about the way Boris Malenko trained people to be professional wrestlers. So I just wanted to, if you could maybe expound on that a little bit.
Yeah, well, Professor Boris Malenko was not only my wrestling coach and teacher and trainer, he was a mentor, and he was like a father figure, something I had looked for throughout my life as far as playing sports. And I was very fortunate that I was athletic and I had good coaches and teachers along the way. And I was a young man when I met Professor Boris Malenko. I met and got with Dean after about 4 months. Had been in Japan, and then I eventually met Jody. But back to Professor Malenko, I broke it up in Kentucky where I'm at, and I had sent off all this information at the time with no internet, but we had magazines. And I seen this address, and I wrote several of these promoters with some old 8x10s, black and whites. I'm in the gym posing, whatever, thinking I'm going to be a wrestler. And a gentleman had written me back named Marvin Joel, who was a friend of Malenko's, and said this. He sent me some flyers, information. And at the time I was teaching school, and I thought there's several different places. And one of them, I went up to the Monster Factory and back, and that was just a one-day little tryout thing. I thought, okay. I wasn't going to move to New Jersey. It just wasn't in the cards. And I had broke in with this guy in Kentucky, and I had about 10 or 12 matches. I didn't know shit. Me and him would go out there and beat each other up. That's what I knew. And so anyway, I knew some guys that needed a roommate in Florida, in Orlando. And I had vacation there with a couple buddies with these guys that I knew from my home area. So they're down there working and having a good time. We're all young. And I was like, well, fuck, I'll go down there and I can commute back to Tampa. It's 90 miles away. Let me just go down here and see what's happening. I got a place in Orlando. So I did that. I went down one Saturday morning. I met Malenko and told him my situation. He put me in a ring. He called a little match, about 5 minutes. I did everything he asked me to do, but I still didn't understand. No one had smartened me up to working. I still thought, beat him up and then block him on a suplex or whatever this guy was trying to do. And but it all worked out. It was not a shoot. It was just trying to see what I could do. And he took me out back and he said, hey, Bobby, it's evident that you love professional wrestling. You've been a little bit involved. He goes, but, and this is one of the best things, this is what Malenko says. He said, Bobby, all those guys up there in Kentucky and Tennessee and West Virginia, God bless them. All they want to do is poke you in the eyes and punch you in the face and kick you. If you just forget about everything you think you know about professional wrestling and start at square one and let me train you, I think you have potential. And he said, would you be willing to do that? And I said, yes, sir. And he said, now here's the system. Here's what I charge. We do it 4 days a week. At the time, it was Saturday, Sundays, Tuesday, and Wednesdays. And at the time, I knew I could commute back, late Friday night or Saturday morning and get down there. And I said, yes, sir, we do. And from that moment on, we shook hands. And man, like I said, he become more like a father figure and a mentor. And he put my ass through some stuff too.
Oh, I've heard that.
Nice.
Yeah, hot asphalt. There was a building at the time. It was this asphalt leading up to the opening of the gym where the ring was at. He'd take me out there and he'd sit in a chair and he said, do this. And I'd do 10 and ones of that hot Tampa sun, and which is push-ups. So you do 10 Hindu squats, 1 push-up, 9, 2, and you build up to where you got 10 push-ups, 1 Hindu, and then you work your way back. And I'd be out there I got in the best shape of my life. He was known for conditioning. And then he'd say, do this, and I'd go out there and I'd neck bridge. And I did everything he asked me to do because I was young and I wanted it. It's one of those things where it's just what I wanted to do. And I was fortunate enough to meet this gentleman in my life at the right time and athletic enough. And I was like, boy, I really didn't know anything about professional wrestling, that side of it, that I thought I did, because he made my ass condition before I started doing more stuff in the ring. And I was like, I'd go to Tampa going, damn, I go to a gym in Orlando and I'm thinking I'm in shape. But I was like, no, this is ring conditioning. And this is how you become a professional wrestler, because this man had been there and done that. And he'd tell me stories and accolades and this and that. Like, well, I've held on to every damn word the guy said. I kept showing up every Saturday and Sunday for like about 4 months. And then a room opened in Tampa. And by this time I met other guys my age and, stuff like that happened, your training and stuff. And I'd go to the gym when I'd get to Tampa and go to lunch afterwards and stuff like that. I started rooming here and there, like, just a room for at night, Saturday. Well, a room opened up, and then I moved to Tampa, and I went 4 days a week. I went Saturday and Sunday mornings, and I went Tuesday and Wednesday afternoon, and I did not miss for 4 months. And during that time, man, I mean, it was incredible to do that, and that was my training, and I just kept, and the other thing was I stayed there. It wasn't just because of that 4 months. It was just because I just kept coming back. Even when I went to Canada for my territory, I worked the job and a couple years, and I ended up going to Canada when an opportunity came, and I even went back after that tour was over, and I was like, man, that was the best advice ever. And so I just kept staying active with the Malenkos after I had, quote, I don't think you ever graduate professional wrestling.
Always a student.
Of course, going to school for X amount of time, and I just kept going back.
Yeah.
So I loved it.
Well,
as we wrap up here, Bobby, I have one final question for you. I mean, obviously, we still have so much more I'd love to talk about, but one final question for you. Benny mentioned in the intro, and obviously, it's a big chunk of your wrestling history. You had a hell of a run in Smoky Mountain.
Yeah.
You won the heavyweight title, the TV title a couple of times, junior heavyweight title, I believe, 4 times. Now, obviously, everybody knows Jim Cornette. He's the legendary wrestling manager. He's the #1 rated wrestling podcast. It's right now one of the top selling merch items was the special run of the Midnight Express figures they did. He's a name that's constantly popping up on Dark Side of the Ring and other things. Right. Everybody knows his history on that side, but something that never really gets talked about is Jim Cornette, the promoter. Yeah. I was wondering, it's kind of my last question to you is like, what was that like? What was he like as a promoter working for him?
Well, I'm a Jim Cornette guy. I knew Bobby Eaton before I really got into business because every time they come to this area, I'd speak to him, and I always speak to him. And Bobby would, hey, Jim, come here. And so I'm just a young boy, just trying to get into business, like I said, and this and that. And bless Bobby Eaton, William, like you said, man, never hear anything bad about him, but go back to his story. I had been trying to I was in Tampa, Florida, and I kept running into all these, like I said, all these different people, talents. Tommy Rogers saw me one day and he said, "Hey, Bobby," and this was outside of Malenko's, outside the gym. We used to work on the same gym. And he said, "Hey, aren't you from up there around Tennessee?" And I said, "Yeah," which people get that confused all the time. It's understandable. And he said, "Man, Jim Cornette, me and Bobby's," talking about Bobby Fulton, been going up there and doing some TVs here recently. Would you be interested? And I'm like, God, I'm wanting to get back to my home up here in Kentucky. I'm here in Tampa forever and that area. And I was like, heck yeah. And he goes, "I'll have Cornette get a hold of you." Well, that evening, Cornette did call me. I gave him his number to Tommy. Cornette called me. He said, "Bobby," he said, "be home at 9:00. And this is true. I said, "Okay." So I went to the gym, whatever I was doing that day. I don't, went to training, whatever. 9:00, Cornette calls me. He says, "Hey, Bobby, Jim Cornette, I'm really busy. Can I call you another tomorrow about this same time?" I said, "Yes, sir." Click. I run into Tommy the next day. He said, "Hey, Jimmy call you?" I said, "Yeah, but he was really busy. We didn't get to talk." He said, "Be home at 9:00 when Jimmy calls you, or call him," or whatever it was. I call Cornette. I give him my information. He said, "Oh, yeah, blah, blah, blah. Send me a tape. Send me what you have." I sent a tape and some pictures. That was he had just started TVs. This is in like March of 92. So about February, I'd heard these things were being filmed. And of course, the dirt sheets back then. Anyway, long story short, I come home in June because I'm going to go to Canada. So I stopped by my hometown in Ashland, Kentucky. And William knows from these towns, I'm sure they were going to be an hour away. Smoky Mountain Wrestling was. I said, "Well, hell, I'm home for like 3 weeks. I'm just in between training in Tampa to go to Canada." I go up to the show. I'm sitting in a building. Cornette walks in, and he goes, "Hey, blah, blah." And it's just me and the guy that's promoting at the time and Cornette in the building. And I was there waiting on him. He said, "Hey, yeah, I know who you are." I gave him a couple new pictures, another VHS, and I said, "I'm on my way to Canada. I've got this tour for the next 18 weeks. And we talked, and he said, "Well, Bobby," he said, "you going to stay for sure?" And I said, "I'd like to, of course." And he said, "Stay here and see where you think you might fit in." So I went back and I waited, and guys started showing up, and I talked to several of them. I knew who Robert Gibson was. I knew who Primetime was. Brian Lee had met in Florida briefly, just, "Hey, how are you?" kind of thing. And the Armstrongs, I was like, "Okay." I'm just sitting by the babyface locker room going, "Oh, this is a good crew." And then I saw the heels like Dr. Tom and Dutch Mantell and Cornette coming out with them. Like, damn, I'd love to work here. But I had to do this tour, and I wanted to do that tour, and that's all I had. So I go on tour, come home, I call Corny. I kept telling him, he goes, "Yeah, Bobby, I know who you are. When I go full time, I might have something for you." I'm like, "Okay, great." Well, then some other stuff happens. Next thing I know, I go to Australia. I come back from there. Cornette calls me, wants me to have a tryout. To answer your question, from that very first meeting, 9 months later to getting on, I had a tryout against Brian Lee in Beckley, West Virginia. He put me over. Brian Hildebrand, Mark Curtis put me over. Cornette brought me back, and he said, great stuff. Gave me my money. So to answer your question, Cornette to me was a great promoter. As Booker too, and he paid me that day for a tryout match. And he told me, this is the minimum everyone here makes. Would you like to do TV? I said, yes, sir. After a few TVs, he come up to me. He said, Bobby, I got this idea. And that was a junior heavyweight title run. Now, I know Sandy Scott and Mark Curtis, and I know I had the Booker, the backer with Rick Rubens and things. But on money, Cornette has not owed me a dime. He would. One time, he said to me, Bobby, don't cash this until after Monday. And this was a Sunday afternoon show. He goes, maybe Tuesday or something. I said, okay. And I held it. I didn't go home and check it, cash it right away. But it was I'd ran either Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and a shot on Sunday. I was like, okay, no worries. When I cashed it, it went through. Thankful like yours, William, you know what I'm saying? Like it. And then another time, Cornette said, let me get your name and social. And he goes, man, it's going to be a couple of weeks. And I had been on a 3-day run. I knew about what he owed me. And I stayed in touch with him during that time. Of course, he was doing WWF stuff or WWE stuff at that time. And we were getting ready to shut down. And I called, he called me. And every time he was like, that will be sent to you. And within a few weeks, maybe a couple of weeks, he said, just give me a little bit of time. I was paid every single penny that when I worked at Smoky Mountain. Like I said, I was asked to hold a check until a Monday after that Monday, because I'd come off the road, and I did, and it was no problem. And the other one was like, just in a couple of weeks, I'll get you. Is that good? And the thing about that was there were a lot of guys, Tracy, Bobby, some other people, Ricky and Robert, that was traveling farther than I was rather. So I was an hour and a half from home, and I was like, yeah, Jimmy, that's fine. And I was doing a little training thing and this and that. Long story short, when that couple of weeks passed, Horny called me and said, hey, that checks, everything's good. And he took care of it. He gave me my first break in the U.S. as far as getting on that TV program. And just being a part of Smoky Mountain Wrestling, the locker room, it had veterans, it had young guys. It was a good mix. And, I've seen Cornette explode, and I've seen him do this and that. But, man, to me, he went off of me one time because I fucked up. But it was for like 30 seconds. I got back in the back, and Robert Gibson said, and I was worried. I was like, oh, shit, I've lost my job. I'm fucked up. He goes, no. He goes, listen, I've known Jimmy a long time. He said, the next match went to the ring. He done forgot about you. Don't worry about it. Sure enough, after the show, hey, Bobby, thanks. And it was back to normal. It was just one of the things. I went out there and on a TV, and I told this guy, I said, just attack me as soon as I had an opening. And I said, it was Larry Santos. And I said, hey, Larry, just go out there as soon as I take off my jacket and attack me. Well, when I come back through, Cornette exploded and said, God damn it, Bobby. That's what he had planned for Killer Kyle and Mike Burke. And he said, you fucked up. He said, you're trained by Malenkos. This way he said, you're trained by Malenkos. You know a million fucking holds, and you go out there and have a guy attack you. You're supposed to wrestle, motherfucker. He's yelling at me from the stairs as soon as I come in. I'm like, yes, sir, yes, sir. And he goes, damn, Mike Furnace don't know anything. I was going to have Killer Kyle attack him. Now I got to fucking change it. And dude, it was 30 seconds of fucking craziness. And then, like I said, Robert told me after the finish of whatever, he put a gimmick match in, then put Curtis and Furnace in or Mark Killer Kyle. And I was like, after the show, Jimmy was like, hey, Bobby, thanks. Here's your check. No worries whatsoever. But I love Jim Cornette. Yeah, he can cuss you out and burn you up. But I only had that one incident. But I'd been there 2.5 years at that point or whatever. So I was like, okay, I get it. And I'm a Cornette guy, and he's always been good to me. Let's go in real quick. He put the forward in my first book, Pin Me, Pay Me, So I'm a Jim Cornette guy, man, all the way. Nice. I was before I got into wrestling. Because I always cheered for the heels anyway.
Right. A young kid like me, you know, a young kid like me loved watching the Midnight Express, even though
Oh man,
you know, I
greatest
knew I
tag
wasn't
team
supposed
ever.
to.
Greatest tag team ever.
You'll get no argument from me. It's always good to hear. Well,
Yeah.
like I said, guys, as we're wrapping up, Benny, final question to you. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I have a question for Bill, because I know he wanted to talk about the YouTube channel that you guys are working on. So I wanted to get an idea what
William's
that's
work
all
on that.
about.
That's a little leg work. William is work on that, Benny. He's putting the leg work in now that I put in before with Jeremy. So go ahead, William. Tell him about that YouTube channel you've been putting up here. Thank you again. Both. Thank you, gentlemen, for having me on. But William, thank you for taking this YouTube page. Tell him what's going on.
Official Bell to Bell with Bobby Blaze.
Yeah.
There's another Bobby Blaze channel out there on YouTube. We had control of that.
Yeah.
We no longer have control of it. We're moving everything over to the new channel. And we're putting up all the original podcast episodes that were never aired on YouTube. There's like 164 of them. I think I've put about 80 of them up so far. But we want people to come out there and listen, because you're going to hear a lot of these stories. You're going to hear a lot of insider stuff that goes on, because, you know, Bobby's unfiltered. Bobby and Jeremy, the professor Jeremy Vilmer, they go on there unfiltered and they tell you really what's going on behind the scenes. And it's a great page to go look at and listen to. We're going to try to get more into talking personally with some of the fans that are signed up on the channel. And it's just, we're really trying to work to get it out there to everybody. So if it doesn't say official, it's not the right page. It's official Bell to Bell with Bobby Blaze.
Official.
Go check that out, because we had the other page that had over millions of views and over 10,000 subscribers, I guess. And some things happened in life that just happened. Someone sadly passed away. It was helping us. Jeremy and I had several different agreements as to how long we would do this and do that. And we respected those boundaries. And then William just come in like, can I do this? And I'm like, hell yeah, you can do it. So go to the official Bell to Bell with Bobby Blaze on YouTube. I'd appreciate it. I know William would. And I think the fans would really, really, really enjoy some of my stories on there, because that's what I do. I just sit there and Jeremy and I talk, and it's completely fucking unfiltered.
Yeah.
I love it.
Bobby, real quick,
because
Dan and I are both writers, I'm going to use the term of Mr. Backlund. Where could we procure your books?
Dude, I wrote down, procure my books at Amazon. That cracked me up the way you wrote that, and said it just now. Go to Amazon.com. Just go to Bobby Blaze Smedley, author, and then also, or just go to type in Pin Me, Pay Me. Generally, they come up right there. It's Pin Me, Pay Me, Have Boots for Travel. That was my first book. My second book, I kicked out on Tuesday, Educational Wrestler. They're both right there. They're available in ebook on Kindle, and the Kindle app is free. Nice. And of course, you can get the print edition there. Just go to, or if you'd like, follow me on Twitter and Instagram. I have no Facebook. You're not talking to me if you're talking to someone on there, but I am at official. I'm Bobby Blaze 744, football, basketball numbers. So it's Bobby Blaze 744, Instagram and Twitter only. That's all I have for social media. YouTube, I'm with William on that official Bell to Bell with Bobby Blaze. But go to Amazon. It's under Bobby Blaze. It's under Bobby Blaze Smedley. You type in Pay Me, it's coming up, one of the top ones. And I appreciate you letting me plug that book. So go and procure your.
I also if you sign up on the YouTube page, on the official Bell to Bell YouTube page, the links for those books are in every one of the podcasts.
Oh, all right. Okay. Good to know.
Good, William. Good.
So,
good to know.
Very cool. And when we put the audio up tonight, or when I put the audio up tonight, I'll include the links on the homepage for us as well.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, guys, I mean, absolutely love hearing the stories. I mean, the Sugar Hold, any good stories from Smoky Mountain, gotta love it. So, again, thank you all so much for your time. This has been great. We had a lot of good fun on the YouTube. Thanks to everybody in the chat, as always, very active. Although it was mostly a baseball chat tonight. We did have. I'm not gonna spoil it with a sour mood, but some unfortunate news coming out of the baseball world while we were recording. For those that hadn't heard, it was broken a little about 7:45 that the greatest to ever swing the bat, Pete Rose, passed away tonight. So we were talking about that. Benny and I, we always sneak in a baseball reference. We did at the top of the hour.
That's sad. That really is sad.
Yeah.
Wow. Really?
Like I said in the chat, the worst part for me is going to be now he's going to get posthumously inducted by the same people that went out of their way to keep him out while he was alive.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, but
I feel fortunate. I feel very fortunate to have seen him play several times back in the day.
Same here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Him and Bench and all those guys.
Yeah. Man. Yeah. Fuck. Thank you for telling us that that's sad breaking news. Yeah.
Yeah, it really is.
Very, very unfortunate. But no, we had some fun tonight. Chat was very appreciative of the story. Obviously, a bunch of historical wrestling fans among us. So Sugar Hold, Bill Harding, Bobby Blaze, again, like he said, we'll link the Amazon books, the YouTube page for the playa himself, Benny Scala. I'm Dan Sebastiano. Thank you guys so much. Obviously, we were live. Monte the Pharaoh, our friends at YouTube, Dan and Benny can be heard anywhere podcasts are listened to. I'm Dan Sebastiano. Have a good night, everyone, and we will see you next.